I'm Connor Old and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be looking at my predictions of the leftover categories. Now, I want you to subscribe to the channel because there's going to be a lot of Oscar stuff going on. This is my last of the categories for my initial predictions and really initial deep dive breakdown. I eventually will, in about a week or so, release my final Oscar predictions before the Oscar nominations come out, and I'll be going less so into detail with review my final picks and my sort of ultimate decision. Of course, you can check out all the other episodes in terms of explaining what I think happens, but also we're still missing a few things that will really impact them. Things like the PGA nominations, BAFTA nominations, and DGA nominations. That's going to have its own separate video in terms of the predictions and the reactions to those. And then, of course, the Golden Globes, which I know everyone and a lot of people on the channel really like. I'm going to be reacting to those, including giving my final predictions for that ceremony. There's just so much happening. So stay true to the channel, see my reactions, see my predictions for the Globes, the Oscars, keep you informed of what's going to win. The Oscar nominations is so complicated, you don't know what to do for the fourth or fifth slot of visual effects, original score or song. Stay tuned for some of these technical categories, because these are the categories that are definitely going to win. And what I try to do, of course, is give you that information to make sure you give the right predictions. And starting off the top of the show, I always like to talk about rising and falling movies. I'm going to talk about some movies that are gaining buzz based off this past Christmas box office. So these are all the sort of Christmas movies that are released wide into Christmas that really ultimately make an impact in terms of their box office chances or whatnot. So in terms of the rising movies, we have Uncut Gems, Little Women, and 1917. 1917 has been released sort of limitedly, but has done well in its limited theatrical run before it goes to IMAX and really expands wide first week of January. So not opening wide the same way Little Women and Uncut Gems did, and Uncut Gems seemingly is maybe one of the most profitable movies A24 has ever done. Seems to be doing very well at the box office. A Little Woman is also a film that I thought would do very well commercially. Seems to do well as well, and seems to have at least some really good legs and really be a standout movie for Sony and Amy Pascal Pictures. So that maybe will help its chances for come Oscars. That it does do well commercially, which I expected. But Little Woman is a movie that needs all the sort of buzz it can get at this point. And then some falling movies based off their box office is Bombshell, Richard Jewell, and A Hidden Life. A Hidden Life has really sort of only been in limited, but hasn't been doing that well limited. Some people are thinking that now that Disney has owned it, they don't want to compete with some of their own movies, something like a Star Wars, so they sort of been pushing it out in very sort of limited screenings. And the assumption is that it has no awards consideration, probably not going to do very well wide. The movie didn't cost a lot to make, but this is not the comeback that many people, including maybe someone like for Fox Searchlight when they picked up the movie at Cannes, thought it would be. And then in terms of Bombshell and Richard Jewell, two films that I thought would do well, but Richard Jewell opened pretty poorly and hasn't been sort of necessarily growing as well. Could do well over the Christmas break. Something like The Mule didn't open up really well, but sort of had legs and ultimately got over 100 million domestic. So this is not uncommon for something maybe Richard Jewell to do this well. However, Bombshell is another movie that is in a similar situation where Richard Jewell, could have those legs. Bombshell could have his legs, especially in terms of the awards conversation. It does hurt that it's not doing super well and not really sort of taking over the Christmas box office the way some people thought. And maybe that shows its limited appeal, which will ultimately affect come the Oscars, that especially with the more international voters, maybe less people will see Bombshell. Who knows? But jumping over now to my predictions for Best International Film, my first pick is of course going to be Parasite. This is the obvious contender for the winner. I'm thinking if it has a really good night, it can get possibly something like 7 nominations. It's surprisingly doing well and has been a contender and shortlisted on surprising things like Best Original Song, getting in at the Ace Eddie Awards for Best Editing, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and getting in some of these Guild Awards really show the strength of Parasite as the Best Picture contender. Now, is there a possibility that this doesn't get nominated? Yes, but it's highly, highly unlikely. Even in years where the Best Foreign Film gets multiple nominations but doesn't win Best Foreign Language Film, years like Pan's Labyrinth or Amelie, those are years where they get 5 nominations but they also don't win Best Foreign Film. That has happened before, but never have we really seen a movie get multiple nominations the way we expect Parasite to get director and screenplay and editing and production design. For it not to get foreign film, we're expecting this to even get Best Picture. So it just makes sense, of course. You sort of have to lock it in there. There's some little things like, South Korea's never been nominated before. They very rarely get shortlisted. Great movies, too, that have been sort of left out, something like a Burning or an Old Boy. So that's something that we want to, technically keep in mind for, but I think you can pretty safely, if there's really anything but a lock. If I think, for example, Parasite's going to win Best Picture, well, it's got to get in at least for a nomination for Best International Feature Film, which is now, it was renamed. It used to be Best Foreign Film, now it's Best International Film. So same category, similar rules apply. But I still think that, from South Korea, Parasite, if it's going to win Best Picture, it's got to get at least nominated here. At least that's my belief. Then we have Pain and Glory from Spain. This is another sort of movie in the Oscar conversation. Of course, it has Antonio Banderas from this movie is campaigning in Best Lead Actor and has been getting in a lot of places. A lot of people also think Pedro Almodovar, the director of the film, could very well get in for a Best Director nomination, similar to someone like a Paweł Pawlikowski, who got in for Best Directing last year, and then for his film Cold War, and then it also got in for Best Foreign Language Film. And Pedro Almodovar is a sort of a celebrated international filmmaker. He's someone who has had his films have been nominated multiple times for Best Foreign Language Film. Of course, his films have won. He won personally. So this is a category that he's sort of used to and known to. And I think that this movie just has a lot of buzz in other categories. Director, screenplay, actor. That very well it could fit into very easily getting a nomination here. International film. And my next pick is from France, Les Miserables. This is a film that, not based off the play, that they adapted into a film by the director of Cats, Tom Hooper, and got a bunch of Oscar consideration that year, including Anne Hathaway. This is a film that is France's selection over the more sort of critically acclaimed sort of Portrait of a Lady on Fire. However, this is also very critically acclaimed and very well respected within the industry. It's a film that won the grand jury at Cannes. It was nominated, was in competition for the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It was very sort of well liked. France chose this as their selection instead of something like Portrait of a Lady on Fire. So I feel like pretty confident this one's going to get it into. France, a European country, of course, and this sort of branch of the Academy does like to nominate European cinema because, of course, going back to the French New Wave and even before then, France has had a great history with excellent filmmakers and excellent cinema. So there's always sort of, the countries, of course, have a reputation. I think France has some of the best, and which is why they get, nominated almost every year, and Les Miserables is their choice. It got nominated along with Portrait of a Lady on Fire at the Golden Globes. Lock these sort of first three in as pretty much locks. But now, as we get into the fourth and fifth slot, that's where things get a little bit more difficult to tell. And my first one I'm going to go with is Atlantics from Senegal. Netflix has been having a great year, and this is a film that's also acquired by Netflix. So I think that actually helps in a lot of scenarios. With all these films, for something like Cold War, a large reason why I think Paweł Pawlikowski got in for Best Director is because Amazon, the film which distributed Cold War, really sort of pushed for that in terms of it didn't have a lot of Oscar movies that year, so it really wanted to push Cold War as a potential Oscar campaign. They were really campaigning this movie heavily. In a lot of ways, while Cold War was, of course, Amazon, the streaming companies that have these foreign films that sort of have a lot of money behind them and a lot of campaigning, that can help these foreign films do well in terms of these categories where there's less sort of campaigning because you have a film from Poland and the director is not going around campaigning and shaking hands because it's in a different country, for example. So having Netflix behind this movie Atlantics is really helpful and really going to help sort of push it over the edge. It's also a film that's been critically acclaimed, that along with Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and of course Pain and Glory and Les Miserables and Parasite have been really well acclaimed movies of the year. So I think that, while you're watching Two Popes or while Marriage Story, The Irishman, you see Atlantics on there. Oh, I've heard great things from that. Is there supposed to be very well good? It's made the shortlist. I should watch it. It's sort of an easy thing, and you'll be a little bit more favorable towards that. Now, Senegal is a country that has never been nominated before, and this group can be a little bit exclusionist. However, I still think that this is a film that is critically acclaimed, is on Netflix, has that boost, has that support. Not always the critically acclaimed films get nominated here, but that being said, I still think that right now Atlantics is sort of my critical love, Netflix boost factor, and those sort of two factors in that I think it will get in for the fourth slot. And then my fifth slot, I'm actually going to go with Corpus Christi. Really, this slot and these really last two slots are so up in the air because there's never really a clear guild that tells you, or gives you hints or anything. A lot of times you're going based on the Golden Globes, but they have different rules. For example, they nominate Portrait of a Lady on Fire, that's not eligible, and they also nominate Farewell, also not eligible for international feature because there's different rules, of course. So now we're sort of up to decide, what are the critics like, what has sort of been well respected within the industry, but more importantly, also where the movies are from. Oftentimes, like I said, this group and this branch will nominate, I often find European films. So as a matter of fact, I looked back at the last 10 years to see if this was true. And on average, there was about 2.9 European films per year. So keep in mind, when you're putting in your nominations, most people will have Pain and Glory and Les Miserables from Spain and France, respectively. So that's 2 European films. So that's very much possible that they do 2 European films and 3 from the rest of the world. But if you're not, if you're unsure with this last slot, I'd probably go with a European film as well. So something like a Beanpole from Russia or The Painted Bird, Czech Republic. I'm not super sure in this final slot, but you want a European film most likely just because the odds tell you that. So that's sort of what I really found. And I looked at some of the other nominees. Do they have an Amazon? Do they have a Netflix behind them? None of them really did. So now you're looking at the content of the film. None of the other filmmakers as well have been nominated previously. So you always try to find sort of surprises. You go run through them. None of them have big support from studios, really. None of them have films that were nominated, were directed by people who have been nominated before. I mentioned that just because something like last year, Never Look Away, was directed by a previous, the director of The Lives of Others, I believe. So, that's a previous nominee, so that maybe was less of a surprise that maybe I should have picked up on. So, however, this year, this sort of last slot, I'm going with Corpus Christi right now because Poland is on a bit of a run here with someone like Buffy Wachowski, a Polish director who, of course, did very well last year with Cold War. It's sort of an area that they've sort of been on a bit of a run, and we see this often, time and time again, where there's maybe a couple of years in a row where Germany gets nominated, or a few years in a row there where Canada got nominated. So this is a little bit of a trend that maybe we're seeing with Polish filmmakers. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Corpus Christi get this final slot. But stay tuned for my final Oscar predictions, because specifically this slot is up in the air, with my possible contenders being Beanpole from Russia, which is in a similar situation. It also premiered at Cannes, so it has sort of that industry respect. And then I mentioned, of course, Czech Republic's Painted Bird, which is a 2 hours 45-minute black and white movie about the violence and struggle during end of World War II, and it's epic and it's European, and it's it's very much sort of this type of branch and their kind of a movie. They also have something like Honeyland, which is from Macedonia, which is also competing in the Best Documentary Feature category. It could get in for there because it's very well acclaimed. It did very well at Sundance, getting multiple nominations. That was sort of the documentary, but it's also an international feature. Some people think it's going to get in for both. Some people, like myself, think it's not going to get in for either. Maybe it gets in for one, maybe it gets in for either. Clearly they like the film, clearly they've seen the film, because it's been made the shortlist for both Best Documentary Feature and Best International Feature. However, I'm not sure if they're passionate enough to nominate this sort of beekeeping movie, versus maybe in the documentary side they're going to nominate more issues movies for something like For Sama, for example, in the documentaries. In Best International, they're probably a little bit more European, like I think a Corpus Christi or maybe a Painted Bird. But we'll see ultimately. Now jumping over into my best editing predictions, my first pick is going to be The Irishman. So you may be wondering why The Irishman for number one, because a lot of times the complaints people have of the movie is that it's too long. It doesn't need to be 3.5 hours. This is a journey. I'm watching it at home. Do I really want to cut it up into sort of 2 nights, or do I do sort of a miniseries, 1 hour a night, eventually finishing the movie? Of course, the way I'm sure Martin Scorsese wants you to watch it is this sort of 3.5 hour long epic, but I actually think the length and who's editing the film helps this film in particular. So this film is edited by, if there's any legendary household name editor, it's probably Thelma Schoonmaker. This is a longtime editor of Martin Scorsese's movies since Raging Bull in 1980, and almost exclusively, now in her older age, works exclusively with Martin Scorsese and his movies. She's been nominated a bunch of times. She's won 3 Oscars. She's just a absolute legendary editor, and people respect her heavily. So I think just in terms of getting a nomination, they will, I think, nominate her because of her name and because, you know, she's a great editor and she's done a lot of Martin Scorsese's movies. And then, of course, the length I actually think helps this movie because it's 3.5 hours. It feels like an epic. And actually, epics have done pretty well in the best editing category, whether it be going back to 1982 for Gandhi, or even something before that, you know, Lawrence of Arabia with Andy Coates, another legendary editor, I'd say. You know, in terms of these big epics, in terms of the editing, sometimes longer is better because it makes it feel like it's a bigger scale. You have to do more editing. So oftentimes it actually does help the length of the movie. You never really see an hour and a half, maybe sometimes thrillers or action movies get nominated. You see these sort of long epic journeys that have a lot of editing that are sort of long. You see those get nominated over some of these other movies. Plus, another factor is that if The Irishman is to win Best Picture the way many people predict, it has to get an editing nomination. Because historically, there's a very close link between an editing nomination and a Best Picture win. That in order to win Best Picture, you oftentimes have to get an editing nomination. And this category is actually very indicative to tell us what's going to win Best Picture. Now, every year there's something that, you know, one of the main frontrunners miss out on something, right? You know, last year, for example, Roma had missed out on the editing, so it's like, oh, that's a little bit scary. But Green Book missed out on directing, so, okay, that maybe what's bigger, directing or editing? Well, the Oscars, in terms of predicting, actually, it's sometimes, more often than not, editing. Here's a stat that's interesting. Over the past 38 years, only one film has won Best Picture and has not been nominated for Best Editing. So they don't need to win, but they need to be at least nominated. And that film was 2014's Birdman. So the assumption is that it wasn't nominated for Best Editing because it's done in one take, because they sort of planned out the edits, that they've done it in whip hands and they've been trying to hide it, and that there isn't a lot of editing. And that there isn't a need sort of for editing, and that, you know, they don't nominate because they didn't really notice editing because it's just done in one take. There just isn't that much editing. But despite that, 38 years, I mean, that's a real history. You have to go back all the way to 1980 for Ordinary People to win Best Picture and it not get nominated for Best Editing. So there's a huge correlation there, so watch out in Oscar nominations night for those Best Editing categories. If you think something like The Irishman is going to win Best Picture, but it misses out on something like Best Editing, that will, at least to me, tell it that it's going to have a really hard chance at winning Best Picture, especially if it doesn't have an easy reason like Birdman did, where, oh, there wasn't a lot of editing, you know? So that would really hurt a film. And then my next pick is going to be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for a similar reason. You know, it's a film that it's a Best Picture contender, not as long as The Irishman, but has these sort of tense scenes, where The Irishman, will call it the fish scene. In Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you have Spawn Ranch, which is so edited and sort of built to a pace of these scenes, and these scenarios last so long to build the tension really well, and I think a lot of people will appreciate that. But the film is so well liked, it seems to just be a direct, you know, if the film is so well liked and if the film is going to win Best Picture, it has to get a Best Editing nomination, and oftentimes these Best Editing nominations go to the films that are very well beloved and have Best Picture potential. My next pick is actually going to go to Parasite. Now, this surprisingly was nominated for the Ace Eddie Awards, which really gives me a strength of confidence of me putting it in here. So the Ace Eddie Awards, they are for editors at the Editing Society and Guild. And this is sort of the precursor and will tell us what the industry is thinking. And even though the editor lives in South Korea and is actually not an Ace Eddie member, he still got nominated. So he doesn't have the ACE but beside his name during the credits, but he still got nominated. So that shows them that they really like the film, that they don't care about him not being nominated. I mean, there's certain criteria that you have to meet and whatnot, but that just shows that they really love the film. And the film is also a thriller, and thrillers do very well in this category because they're entertaining, because there's different plot twists in the way the story goes, and there's one surprise after another. The editing really has to do a lot with why the film is so good and why it's so entertaining and why you want to move from one scene to the next and you're always so gripped and you don't really care about the subtitles because you're so invested with the story. It has to do with the interest of the story and how it's entertaining, but also how it's cut together and how it really builds tension. So it getting actually all of my nominations got Ace Eddie Awards, Ace Eddie nominations, excuse me. But Parasite getting in there really gives me a sense of confidence. So if it's going to win Best Picture, it very well could win Best Editing. So watch out for that too. My next pick is actually going to go to Ford v Ferrari. This is a sort of a slot that I'm going to every year goes to a movie that wasn't nominated for Best Picture. Now, Ford v Ferrari, I think if they go up to 9 and maybe even 8, can get in for a Best Picture nomination. However, right now, let's say it doesn't get in for the nomination. I don't think that really matters. It has a lot of tech support. It has through the support from the acting branch for the B. Christian Bale. It's a movie that's in the Oscar conversation, so it wouldn't be surprising to see it here. And it's very much heavily edited, and oftentimes the most edited film gets in for the win. So this, can very well miss the editing nomination, but if it does get in for editing nomination, it very well could win. I mean, the driving scenes in this movie are intense and incredible in the way they sort of cut and make the story very clear, and the race very clear, and the stakes very clear, really help to the entertainment value and the involvement you have with the story. Even if you don't like the movie, you appreciate the technical craft of it, especially something like the editing. So even if Ford v Ferrari doesn't get that Best Picture nominee, I still feel confident putting it in here. And if it does get that Best Picture nominee, this Ford v Ferrari could have a very good chance at winning this category. Then my final slot, I'm going to go with Joker. This is a film that's similar to Parasite, is kind of a thriller, has certain plot twists, has certain things that you don't expect, and sort of all of it is the descent into madness. So you see his reasoning, you see Arthur's sort of reasoning for why he does things later on in the film and becomes the Joker, and that sort of slow sort of build. Todd Phillips has been, what he has been celebrated for is his ability to show tone and atmosphere and really get you in the mind of Arthur and the time period. It's a very entertaining story, I think, and it sort of goes from one scene to the next. And I think Joker's a serious Best Picture nominee and one of the top 5 in my opinion. So I think that Best Editing would not be very surprising. Don't forget something like Bohemian Rhapsody, another critically mixed film that did very well at the Oscars and was really liked by the audience, similar to Joker in a lot of ways, won this Best Editing award. So watch out for Joker getting in here, especially for the Best Editing award. Now into my possible contenders. My first pick has to be 1917. That's sort of the glaring omission because a lot of Oscar prognosticators think this could very much win this category. Now I don't think it's going to get nominated. Why? Well, simply, it's done in one take. And the last film that was in Oscar conversation that was done in one take, surprisingly didn't get in for Best Editing, and that was Birdman. Another thing, 1917 was not nominated for an Ace Eddie Award. So in a lot of ways you think 1917 and you go, oh, obviously, war films often win this category, whether it's Hacksaw Ridge or Dunkirk. So of course it's going to get the nomination, right? It's got those great action sequences. Oh, it's kind of like a thriller, a race against time, done by Lee Smith, the editor of Dunkirk, who just won a couple of years ago. Of course this is going to get nominated, right? Maybe not, because I say it didn't get nominated for the Ace Eddie. It's a long take. I think people won't realize the editing. I think people won't consider the editing well done. There's clearly not a lot of maybe respect for the movie, for the editing of these kinds of movies, these one-take movies, because they're sort of, the edits are already pre-planned out. There's not a lot of editing in terms of the storytelling. It's a lot of just, okay, we have this 20-minute take and this other 20-minute take and stitch them together with a whip pan, and then you keep on going, and they don't really sort of appreciate that. Maybe, maybe not. It's still a film that's well respected. It very much could get in here for the reasons I listed, but as of right now, I'm not super confident in getting in, and I don't think you should be too. So I want you to rethink your 1970 prediction. Does it make sense? Will this sort of get Birdman again? Who knows? But if it does get in for Best Editing, of course, it still makes it a potential Oscar Best Picture winner. And then another possible contender is Marriage Story. This is a film that, if it is going to win Best Picture, there's a very easy chance, it gets in for Best Editing. It wins Screenplay, wins Laura Dern, and wins Picture. That's a very much possibility. It's still in that sort of race. But if it doesn't get in for Best Editing, that will be very crucial. I just think right now it's sort of losing a little bit of steam. I think it's less of a chance of it winning Best Picture. So it doesn't really have flashy editing. So the strength of the film really has to push it over the edge for it to get a Best Editing nomination here. It's very much possible the film is liked, but it has still a tough hill to climb because it's not as flashy as something like even a 1917 or a Ford v Ferrari. It has to sort of get in that category based on its Best Picture potential. Now, jumping over to Best Visual Effects, my first pick is going to go with The Irishman. This is a category I talked about during my Clear Frontrunners episode, in portion of that episode, I talked about how visual effects of The Irishman is a clear frontrunner and to not overthink it. And what are people doing? They're overthinking it. They think, all these different sort of high visual effects will get in, but historically, time and time again, what we've been seeing out of this category is the winners, particularly the winners, this could not get nominated surprisingly, but it's a Best Picture movie. And oftentimes during this category, what we've been seeing is Best Picture movies winning, or sort of quote unquote more Best Picture like movies winning. The example being, something like First Man last year. This was a category that everyone thought was going to go to Avengers Infinity War and was a done deal. I picked First Man because of what the history told me. The history told me that I will go to a film that has either multiple nominations or has sort of been in an Oscar conversation. Something like Interstellar in 2014, which won, 2017, Blade Runner 2049 won. Oftentimes they go to the film that has not the most visual effects or even the most impressive visual effects, but the one that has the sort of most Best Picture-like kind of a movie. That, Blade Runner 2049 got a couple of other nominations. They're not going to go with War for the Planet of the Apes in its sole nomination. They're going to go with something like Blade Runner 2049, which had multiple nominations and was more of an Oscar type of a movie. And that was years where there were no Best Picture contenders. What happens when there's a Best Picture contender in this race? With, exceptions for something like 2015 where Ex Machina surprises, the majority of the time, the Best Picture nominee wins. You're talking about Life of Pi, you're talking about Hugo, you're talking about Gravity. If it's nominated for Best Picture, it should win this category for the most part. Usually this is because the voting bodies of the Visual Effects Society and Visual Effects branch of the Academy will nominate the films in this category. But in terms of the winners of this category, it will go to, in terms of who's voted on the winners, the entire Oscar voting body votes on the winners. So if you're just an actor who really likes The Irishman, you're going to check off The Irishman in every single box, including visual effects. You don't care about the visual effects because you just want The Irishman to win, which is why oftentimes these Best Picture contenders with maybe not super flashy visual effects often get these visual effects Oscar, especially, oftentimes when the film is nominated. Especially, if The Irishman is the only Best Picture contender in this category, it very well, I think, not only, I think it's going to get nominated, and if it does get nominated, I think you should feel confident in it getting in. You may say that, oh, well, some people were distracted by the visual effects, they don't think it's good, they may not nominate it. It's very plausible too, but some people, I think, will also think, wow, they made them look 40 years older, or younger, excuse me. That's incredible. What great technology. What the future of cinema is like. That's very interesting. Or even myself, which is, you watch it for the first 5 minutes and you go, oh, that's a little distracting, but then you get used to it. You don't worry about that. The story takes over. The immersiveness of the film, the filmmaking craft really brings you in. You're not even worried about what the visual effects are because you're so immersed in the story and in the filmmaking craft. So I think ultimately, don't overthink it. Vote The Irishman, because most oftentimes a Best Picture nominee that also gets nominated in this category does very well and oftentimes wins it. My next pick is going to go Star Wars Rise of Skywalker. This is what I talked about last week as the movie that's falling because it's been sort of being crapped on by the critics. It's one of the worst reviewed Star Wars movies. And, it hasn't been doing well at the guilds, not getting in, at the Cinema Audio Society, and only getting, I believe, one nomination for the Motion Picture Sound Editors Guild. When the previous prequel films did very well for sound, or not, the previous sequel trilogy films have done very well at the Oscars in terms of the sound categories. I'm not predicting that as of right now. But why I'm predicting it is for visual effects, because historically Star Wars has done very, very well in the visual effects branch. As a matter of fact, only one Star Wars film has not been nominated for Best Visual Effects, and that was Revenge of the Sith. So even movies like Attack of the Clones and Phantom Menace that weren't well liked, and the Star Wars spin-offs with Solo and Rogue One, these films were still nominated for visual effects. Of course, there's always a great sort of blend of practical and CGI figures. I think people will even get confused that Baby Yoda, they'll think that's in Rise of Skywalker. I think, oh, what a great little visual effect thing, give it to Rise of Skywalker. Just the history of, how that amazing visual effects and the history of this Star Wars films doing so well in the visual effects category, it just makes sense for it to get a nomination here. My next pick is going to go to Lion King. It's similar to Lion King in a lot of ways because it has that sort of photo-realistic environments, which are so amazing and beautiful. You know, a lot of people saw it because it made a lot of money. You may not like the film. You may find it a little bit lifeless or emotionless, or just the same movie that you already saw. But it is photorealistic. It does look very beautiful. The textures are very well done, and they spent a lot of money making it look just like a National Geographic movie. I think you would respect that visual effects. And even though it's an animated film, The Jungle Book, for example, won for best visual effects and has the same sort of technology, also done by Jon Favreau. And also, they've nominated animated films before for visual effects. Take a look at a few years ago for Kubo and the Two Strings. So I feel confident, I think, in getting Lion King in for best visual effects. My next pick is going to go to Avengers Endgame. Like I said, I think everyone thought Infinity War was going to win, and then I said First Man was going to win, and I was right, and I was very confident in that. And for some reason, everyone thought Avengers Infinity War would get in, but it didn't happen. Because people, I think, sort of apply narratives onto this film and onto this maybe series that just don't apply. They think they come up with these creative narratives, but they never apply, they never work, they don't make sense. So let me dispel a few of them for you. One of them, first being, is that, it's the end of a saga, it's the end of the series, they want to reward it, right? They did that with the Lord of the Rings, right? Correct, they did do it with the Lord of the Rings, but the Lord of the Rings series as a whole, whether it be Fellowship or The Two Towers, were Oscar-nominated movies. Let's look at some other sci-fi movies that are sort of in the same, or sci-fi, sagas and epic stories that are in the same sort of genre, I guess, and realm of Marvel, like a Harry Potter. For Deathly Hallows Part 2, did it get anything? No. What about Rise of Skywalker? Is it going to get in a Best Picture? No. What about something like, Force Awakens? No, it didn't win because it was sort of the beginning or the end, or even something like Hunger Games that did the, Mockingjay get nominated. No. People don't really, the Oscars don't really care. They don't really apply this narrative that, it's the end of a trilogy, let's reward it for that. And, you could say another reason is, Thanos is so good in it. They didn't give it to Infinity War, and that was really the showcase of Thanos. Then you say, there's all these characters, and it's got the most visual effects, right? The most visual effects gets nominated. Marvel movies get nominated, whether it be Guardians of the Galaxy, or Infinity War, or Civil War, or Doctor Strange. This is, these are movies, Marvel movies get nominated for this category. They oftentimes rarely win. Don't expect Avengers Endgame to get in for these reasons that you're implying, that you're putting on it. Look at the facts, look at the statistics. Best Picture contenders do it very well in terms of winning this category. Look at the Best Picture contender. Avengers Endgame should get nominated. It's the highest grossing movie of all time, not just for inflation. But it's very well liked, but it's not sort of this huge slam dunk that everyone thinks it's going to be, especially for best visual effects. And my final slot's going to go to Alita Battle Angel. Last year I predicted 100 to 1 odds that Christopher Robin would get nominated, and it did. But this year I'm going to go with a less unlikely nominee, I guess, in Alita Battle Angel. What I liked about Christopher Robin was it had its standout visual effect of that being Winnie Pooh and his friends. This year, I think Alita Battle Angel sort of fits that slot where what's the standout effect of this? Alita, her character, the way her face is shaped, her huge eyes. Of course, there's incredible other visual effects of, CG characters with real-life faces on them. But there's incredible sequences with the rollerball sequence, and then this is also plastered all over the film, and it was very successful. The very first, I guess you would say, successful manga adaptation. And what was very successful about the film, I thought, and why I think it's going to get in for visual effects, is that it had James Cameron's name plastered all over it, from producer James Cameron. This was something he wanted to make since a long time, but just never felt the effects were there, and decided to give it to his friend Robert Rodriguez, who was also known for his visual effects in movies like Spy Kids and Sin City. And as a matter of fact, James Cameron movies, 5 of his movies were nominated for best visual effects, whether going back to T2 or The Abyss or Avatar, Titanic. He's known for his effects, for his technology, and his name being on this film helped this, I think, will help this movie get nominated. It even helped, something like Terminator Dark Fate get in for the best shortlisting, because I think James Cameron's name is on it. I think the visual effects community really respects James Cameron. I think they really respect what they did to make sort of anime into live action and sort of meld it in a unique way. And the fans of this movie are really rabid and really want a sequel, and I think there's some fans within the community of this movie too, and I would be surprised for it to get nominated. Some possible contenders. Some people think 1917 will get in, and if it does get in, that would definitely hurt The Irishman's chances, but, I'm surprised it got shortlisted, frankly. Other war movies like Hacksaw Ridge and Dunkirk didn't. And then maybe Gemini Man, which has the sort of youngified Will Smith. But Ang Lee, in a sort of 120 frames, hasn't been well respected within the industry, and if they want to go with the youngified technology, they're going to go with the Irishman most likely. So I feel confident in my 5. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video, and because there's going to be a lot of these videos, a lot of reactions, a lot of predictions, so I want you to stay tuned. Of course, I still have my final Oscar predictions, so stay tuned for that. That's about it, guys. Until next time, stay tuned.